Everybody, welcome back to the Insiders Lounge. Today we have another episode and another special guest. Stephen, thank you for joining me and feel free to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks for having me. Stephen Hogan, Sporting Director of Colorado Switchbacks and USL Championship.
So I'll start it off as we always do. Your first soccer memory. Give me one of the first ones that you can remember back in the day, because I know you're one of the older guests we've had on.
Oh, really?
No, I'm just messing with
you. Chad, thanks. You know what? It's funny. I remember my mother always tells this story. I was a three-year-old, and I vaguely remember walking home. Obviously, you're three. You don't really remember too much, but a soccer memory was I playing with a bunch of 6 and 7-year-olds, and I was just getting the beat crapped out of me. Obviously, I wouldn't remember that. I wouldn't remember the field, but I do remember wailing walking home. And the walk home was like a 10-minute. And my mom trying to calm me down, and then like losing her patience a little bit and going like, you can play tomorrow or whatever. So that's my first small term, like going back to the very beginning, loving the game, I guess, and not knowing it because I was only 3. And then after that, it was obviously just growing up, playing it every day, playing in local tournaments around Ireland, obviously. And, you know, just enjoying the game, getting into every weekend and playing for your local town, which I did for most of my youth career back home. And checking the scores, checking the results on a Monday and Tuesday when you get your papers. That was always exciting for us. But yeah, that those small little memories were the main starting points of my career, and then obviously developing into somewhat of a player. I was back and forth from England between the ages of 13 and 17, like on trials, like a lot of people in our industry, and those were fantastic experiences too. So yeah, they're my early days.
And what was your childhood like? I'm curious to get into like your family dynamic and what was it like growing up as Stephen in Ireland?
Yeah, great family. My siblings are still at home. They all live in the same town. And my mother lives in the town, obviously, where we grew up, a beautiful little town, 20, 25 minutes north of Dublin City. You know, parents were always supportive, very direct, very understanding of the world that we live in. My father, very understanding of the soccer world and how demanding it was. And not just with that, with all of us kids, it was, you know, very supportive. But again, it was like there's no grey area in certain things. So I really appreciate that, and I think I take that as best I can into this role and into the roles that I've been in the soccer world to date. But a fantastic childhood. I wouldn't say I didn't have any sort of problems with it, any arguments in terms of, you know, upbringing at all. Like, I was very lucky in that regard. In fairness, you know, you've heard some stories where people have come up through some horrific stories of what people have come up through, and other than that, I had a great core of friends that I'm still friends with now. Obviously I don't see them every day, but WhatsApp and FaceTime are a fantastic thing. So it's good to have some phone calls into them as well. So I was very lucky.
And when you're looking at it, like I was speaking, my parents are from South Africa, so I was asking them sort of the American influence on them growing up as a cultural thing, and they didn't really have any American influence. I'm curious, now that you're over on the American side and you've been in the US for quite a while now, what was the American influence like on you growing up? Did you have like sort of those experiences like a regular American kid would, or what was that like?
No, I honestly, like, there was no real. Well, obviously, I think the cultures are completely different. The upbringings are a little bit different. You know, obviously, I'm here 20 years, just gone 20 years, so it's a bit crazy, to be honest. There was no, like, you go back and see the kids now, there was no, like, American YouTube and all that sort of stuff. But, like, we just did our normal things. We played outside till it was dark. You know, we were told to come in for our dinners. We didn't really travel a lot. You know, normally we would jump in the car and go to the west coast of Ireland for our trips. I think when I was in my early teens, I did a trip to France and jumped on 2 boats and then got to France or whatever it was and had to drive the length of France. So there was nothing fancy like what you would have, in fairness, over here in the States. But, you know, I never in a million years would think that I was going to end up here for 20 years until I left, to be honest, in 2004.
Yeah, so you mentioned 20 years now. Can we get a quick summary of your career up until Colorado Switchbacks, and then we'll kind of dive into a little bit more of your role now?
Yeah, well, career
I know it's
scholarship.
quite the adventure.
Yeah, a few people have asked me this question over the last few months. It's actually quite interesting when you tell it and you think about it.
Hmm.
Obviously, my career's been fantastic. I've been in the soccer world for my whole career. It's the only thing I was wanting to do, the only thing I think I was good at. But scholarship is in an NAIA school outside Nashville, Martin Methodist. Loved every minute of it. 4 years, some very good soccer players there. And had an opportunity to leave to go D1 or whatever else, and I just said no because I just loved the experience, loved the culture, loved the people. And then from there, my junior year, I met our former head coach, Brendan Burke, when we played together up in Reading, PA, which eventually we can go into that, but Brendan made it a powerhouse in PDL at the time, now USL 2. So we played in 07. And in that year, or in that summer, I was also doing some coaching with the youth part of that organisation. It was called Reading Rage. And they offered me a job when I graduated the following year to come back and take part of the girls' side and take a boys' team, like whatever it was in terms of coaching teams, like anyone else starting their coaching journey with the youth. And ultimately, I went back, played again, but this time Brendan was the coach. Our coach in 07 had left to become the Bermuda technical director. So it was obviously a fantastic opportunity for him.
Yeah.
And Brendan always had the itch, and he was always itching to recruit. Like, he's very good at that. Came back up, and he made me captain for that summer and for the 3 summers after that, to be honest. And it was within that where we started to mould the formation, started to mould an idea, started to mould it like, Brendan's more aggressive. He wants to get forward quickly. At that point, I was a little bit more ball dominant in my mind. Understood transitions, but so it was sort of a good balance between the two of us. And after that, we stayed there for 2 or 3 years, and I was working with the youth part of that organisation. So was Brendan, and a good friend of ours, Jed Quinn, was there too. He's now the academy director of Barca Academy in Arizona. We're in a separate ways. Brendan continued on after, I think, a year after I left with another youth organisation, I believe, only 6 months to a year. But then he ended up in Philadelphia Union, and I went up to Albany, New York, and did Division 2 with St. Rose. Eric and my wife was from there. So after that, I did 5 years there, 2 as an assistant, 3 as a head coach, and loved it. Fantastic. Wanted to always get into the college world. Was never thinking of the professional world, really. We were with Erica's family. We were close. 5-6 hours on a flight from Boston or New York to Dublin. It was great. And then all of a sudden, Brendan left after a few years of Philly and went home to Boston for 2 years and coached at Northeastern up there. And obviously, he recruited very well, did very well up there. And then Bethlehem Steel came back into play. Now, how that all came back into play, Jim Curtin and Chris Albright, and Jim obviously being the head coach of Philly, Chris Albright was the technical director, so the right-hand man basically in Philadelphia at the time. Now he's the Cincinnati general manager. We're very close with Brendan and still are. And he calls me up and he's like, do you want to come down and be the assistant coach of Bethlehem Steel? So I was sort of comfortable, enjoying it, setting up my own small little business, had a D2 program that was average at best, but got them back into playoffs. And
you got the family.
I had the family there. I had our TD now, Alan McCann, playing for me for one season. So so we had some progression and we were doing all right and we were enjoying our life, let's say. And actually my wife convinced me, pushed me to do it. Erica was like, you're never going to get this opportunity again. So that November, in 2015, I was back in a car and driving from Albany to Philadelphia, and I was there for 5 years. So after that, Brendan obviously was finishing up. He was finishing up. Our contract pretty much finished up at the exact same time, and he got the offer. He was top 2 in here. In the end of we came here at the beginning of 21, excuse me. So the end of 2020, COVID year, they flew him out and he was obviously one of 2 to interview. And one of your most recent guests, Brian Crookham, a good friend of all of ours, he pushed for Brendan pretty hard here, because our first year was their last year of a real, like, on paper relationships between the Rapids and Switchbacks. So, and Brian was with us that whole year in the office. It was fantastic, fantastic soccer brain and all that sort of stuff. So he was putting the pressure on for Brendan to be hired, and he did. He got it. So I just came with him because I'd been with him since 2007, if you go back all the way to playing with him. And then we just kicked on, got them back into playoffs, and 2022 we went all the way to the Western Conference. So after that, it was interesting. I remember Brendan going on vacation, and there was rumblings before this that Houston was coming in from. Obviously, everyone knows what happened. He was there for a year. So where he was, like, there's not great phone service or whatever. So it was interesting because I was like, right, you'll be back. I didn't hear from him. And then, like, he's down there and he's got like a few days left, and he was like, this is real. Like, so, like, I was like, okay, blah, blah, blah. And at this point, Brendan knew, because we can talk about that later, where I started to fall in love, let's say, with this sporting director role was in Philadelphia. So Brendan knew where I was, like, sort of where my heart was. But the opportunity was, like, I had to be head coach. So within a weekend, he was gone and I was starting. And it was crazy. It was absolutely madness. And then after that, we did the year. I had, in my own mind, I was going to do this year too. But things just started to progress for the club, really in a development way. And we were sort of aggressive in, for want of a better word, pretty aggressive in, like, this is where we think the club should go on our side, on the technical side, not the business or the front office side. And they sort of just got on board with it and they agreed with it, and back and forth for a few weeks at the end of the off season last year, and it was done. It was an announcement where I was a sporting director as a 39-year-old. So I was like, all right, here we go.
Yeah, next adventure, ready to go.
Next adventure, third real role in the club in 4 years, and now hopefully there's going to be a real, like, stability chain or stability role in terms of, okay, I can build it with the technical staff. Their soccer decisions are all them. And my opinion matters in recruitment. My opinion matters in building the soccer aspect of this organization. But picking the teams and all that sort of stuff is all that. And it's worked out quite well so far.
You've spoken a lot about these relationships that you've been able to nurture over the years, and you guys have stuck together as a core group almost. What are some of the actual ways that you've been able to keep those relationships alive and growing? Because obviously, when you first met Alan and Brendan, you're a college soccer player, or you're coaching each other. You kind of bounce back in between those relationships. Then you're coaching together. Then you sort of get into different roles, and you're working together in different ways. Like, I'm curious to get into more of those relationships. How do those relationships work?
Like, in fairness, I think none of us are afraid to argue, I'd say, to start it off. Like, not in a bad way. We all have strengths and weaknesses, the four of us. Like, and I'd put Brendan in, and he's obviously the one who got us all together. I would say that's a big thing. Like, we can sit in a room, close the door, and with the three of us now, with Alan Chambo, and even though I'm sporting director, with the three of us, it does not matter. It has to be the right decision to move the club forward, and especially what's on the field. So would that be different if I have a different staff? Who knows? So I'd have to build that relationship even more and start that over, maybe. But with these two, it's the three of us know where we're good, the three of us know where we're weak, and we don't mind saying it. It's just sort of how it rolls in. And where it all began is, you're going back and forth to the idea of, playing with Brendan, talking to him about ideas or players, him not agreeing with it. I don't agree with that. But, like, what's the best for where we are now was always a discussion. So I think that's where we learned it from. Always ask an opinion. Don't be hurt when someone doesn't agree with your opinion. It's a big bad world. It's not everyone's going to agree with you. And you can't be upset when people don't agree with you consistently, if you're just trying to keep pushing the envelope in terms of getting the right culture, the right environment, the right player in the building. And that's where we've all sort of stemmed it. I think going back to that, there was never an issue with any of them. Now, listening to them, there's never an issue to any of them arguing a case, and I think that's important. It doesn't mean we don't go have dinner that night if we are hanging out and talk about absolutely something completely different and, wetting ourselves laughing, because we have that too. But I think the relationship for soccer purposes has been really good so far, and in terms of where we are this role. And I was just saying, so far, even though we've known each other for years, this is brand new for all of us. Like, we all bumped left, we all got promoted. You know what I mean? Chamberlain's first year, the head coach, Alan, even though he's fantastic at recruiting, that's his MO really. He's in that TD role, which is very important in that world here or at the next level. So it's all new for all of us this year. And if we keep going and keep pushing, obviously the last 2 results have been fantastic. Can they get a home playoff? Because that's our next step as an organization, is get this structure right to be a home playoff team every year.
I spoke on in the recap episode the idea of long-term relationships when they come before they're transactional. And so a lot of relationships, you start off as a transactional thing. One person needs something from the other, and from the start it becomes almost awkward. You have that awkward tension. Where if you have those relationships where you're playing college soccer together, or you have a coach, like there's those more natural ways of building a relationship, and I think that's what you guys have been able to do.
That, Chad, you nailed it on the head. That's what I want here. I've talked to the ownership groups. There's obviously 2 of them here about succession plans, and in anything, in any walk in life, in my opinion, it's about how we connect. It's about how we are and how our ideas are together, and it's not that awkwardness, or that awkwardness might be still there, but it's not as long as what you might hope or think it's going to be. So that's perfectly way to put it. Yeah.
So let's get into your journey with the Switchbacks then. You've summarized your journey until now. You shifted through the roles, like you mentioned. You've all been shifting roles as you get promoted. So let's get specifically into your roles, and then the sporting director role now. What does that look like? I know there's a lot of information and understanding of head coaching and sort of that role, but I think sporting directors and any of the other roles that are above that, and in a sense, sporting director, GM, all these roles that we have now, people don't have an understanding, I think, of what the actual role is. So if you can get into that a bit more. Yeah,
I had to explain it once or twice here too as well. But it's obviously big in Europe. It's now big in world soccer, let's say. But the idea of my role is complete support for the technical staff. So let's say we didn't have the relationship, we didn't have the idea of what we've had for 4 years here, and there was a completely different staff there. In my opinion, that staff is supported wholeheartedly from the sporting director. And the other side of it is, to break it down simply, is recruitment and building the structure of the soccer organization, not the business or the front office. Now, as sporting director, you're in charge of all of that on our side. But the idea of understanding the coach, understanding his staff, understanding their tweaks in terms of what they're really good at again and what they're weak at and how they all help each other. Maybe I need to figure out, okay, maybe there's one person missing that they need to go into small details. So maybe an extra coach on the field, or an extra sports performance, or Stephen, our trainer, needs an assistant, something like that. That's where this role becomes very important in terms of just keeping the balance right in terms of the staff. And then mainly is 12 months out, recruiting. So this is the first time this organization has had someone who is sort of, so when the guys are away, and I've done it once now and I'll do it again this month, when the guys are on the road, I'll be in a different city. So I think that's massively important for an organization to be 12 months in advance in their recruiting. And then the foundational pieces is Switchbacks 2 was just announced about 2-3 weeks ago. So that's our second team. And they have a full slate of games through now to Thanksgiving, but they have a full season already planned from February 1 through the end of our season next year. And what I want and what I was doing, because I was slowing that process down, because I wanted to make it right in every aspect of it, from the players that we're recruiting. There's a 30-man roster. Are they all going to make it? No, we know that. It's world sports. It's obviously professional sports, 1% of that might make it into James or Alan's team. And that's important, because that 12 months is going to give me an idea of if we can put an academy underneath that team, and now you have a complete organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, it's the other places I've been to this season to visit. I've met with presidents and general managers, is exploring training facilities, reporting back to the ownership groups, because that is potentially a next step for us. Potentially, like obviously there's just been talk about it, but there's nothing down on paper or anything like that. But there's an idea that, oh, if we had this, well then Switchbacks 2 and our academy underneath will need a place, they'll need a home to train and, you know, and execute what we demand. So for me, that's the sporting director role. That might be different for a different club. That might be different for a different individual, but that's the way I see it. But the two things are quite important to me: recruiting 12 months and support, which I think we're getting to a base where our profiles are now popping up and we're figuring it out. We have data in play now, which is new for me. Over the last 2 years, I say we've started to really do that. And then we just make a decision on if the person's right, because most of the players that we're seeing are good enough to play at our level. It's just if the person's right. So that's the last step. But that's, if that makes sense, that's it in a nutshell for me.
Yeah, no, you did it spot on there. I'm curious now. So you mentioned that idea where you're getting a ton of the benefits. I'm sure the ownership group is seeing that as well, the benefits of having someone in a separate role where you're in that sporting director role specifically. Why aren't other teams in the league looking at that? I know it's still a unique thing to have a sporting director. You don't see a lot of teams with that. So why do you think you guys are sort of a step ahead in that regard?
No, I would say that's 50-50 in that. I do think teams have it. It's just maybe called something different, like director of football. If you think about it at Loudon, you know, if you think it's James O'Connor, who similar sort of timelines, way better coach than I was, but he obviously won the thing. But he's the president of Louisville. You know what I mean? You think of those sort of positions. You know, those sort of positions, those sort of people. They're in the clubs. There's just not a lot of them are called sporting director, I guess. But in terms of trying to answer your question, I think it's vitally important to go off on a branch here to be the connection to the president. You know, I think that's vitally important. Where me and him are having. Normally we would meet on a Monday, but it's Labor Day. We would sit down and talk and go through the week and go through maybe the month, or go through a Switchbacks 2 update, or go through a player update before the head coach comes back in and has to give another update on, you know, during the week or whatever. So,
and previously, did you see a lack there, like not a lack of communication, but maybe a gap where you could have had more communication, and now with your role, it's become easier? Yeah,
I would believe because of the travel, because of the game schedule, because of your planning, your trip, your basically where we're going, your next game. Like we've Tampa here next. Like James is not thinking of, all right, do I need to talk to him immediately? Can I focus on doing post film and breaking that down as a staff, and then preparing for Tampa? I remember that from last year. It's tough to then go, oh, I got to pick up the phone at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and you're mentally like, you just want to lie down. So I do think it's vitally important where there's a little bit of a buffer. I'm not saying that when I say I have to fully support this, it's now you're part of the organization as well. So you have to take it all, balance it out, give messages when they're there, give messages to front office when they're there. And honestly, full transparency is normally the way to be, but sometimes you've just got to protect both parties at times, and that's just sort of where you're at.
We spoke on the idea that you mentioned that the second team is now coming into play. Obviously, there's plans, or at least ideas, where you want to start getting that full sort of tiered system. You have the academy as a part of it. If we look back at your career, you're obviously a part of the Philly Union system, one of the best youth academy systems in the U.S. Can we talk on some of the strategies that you've been able to bring from Bethlehem Steel, from the Philly Union side, to where you're working now? Obviously, Alan having an influence from that as well.
Great question. Yeah, what a fantastic, place to learn. Honestly, the word you have is, for me, is lucky in that regard. And then the first and second year, you have the players like the Aronsons, Brendan Aronson, Mark McKenzie.
Yeah, I've got the full list here, and it's half the question is just a list of names. Unbelievable.
What is it? Trustee Anthony Fontana, Matt Real, who we have here on loan from them. It does go on forever. what I learned from that on the field, because I was coaching them day to day. Obviously, Brendan was the head coach. Patience is a big word now that I have, that I would probably, my wife would like me to have a little bit more at home, but I have a lot of patience in work. Now, what I mean by that is that, like, there was a higher ups than me. So in the room with Jim Curtin, Chris Albright, Ernie Stewart, who arrived a month, 3 weeks after I did as an assistant coach at Bethlehem Steel, and obviously Brendan, where I learned all this, I just shut up and listened. And once we had a time frame, a platform, and how the players were progressing, we started to understand that players need at least 18 months. This is where I'm going with patience, before Jim should get them. You know, but he might take them up every 3 weeks to give them a little, a little taste of it, a little idea of, like, you've been doing well, here we go. They were fantastic at that.
Right.
And we would then do it with the academy, and obviously Brendan and the academy were connected, and, players would be like, the academy was telling Brendan, and we'd have them up for training. There was no issue there. And that was we were very flexible with that. So that, like, that patience and that flexibility are massive in my 5 years in Philadelphia. And then probably after the end of my second year, they sent me to Cameroon to scout Olivier Bison.
Wow.
And that was sort of the start of, like, oh, I want to do this. I want to find. And Olivier, that weekend, that 4 days was crazy, because we landed and the showcase, let's say, started, and Olivier wasn't there. And he showed up halfway through the first day, and he had a quad strain, a small one, and he played the second half of that second game that we watched, and he was the best player in the field. But we had already started the process, because Chris had a relationship with the connection there, and the lad that was dealing with it in Africa, and it was fantastic to listen and learn and go, what is going on here, in the room. And then I went to Y Scout. Then they flew me to, obviously, Cameroon, and I came back, and I was just like, this is it for me in terms of that. Obviously, a big influence, like, it's Ernie Stewart running it was fantastic. Chris Albright knows everyone, and he understood how to have a conversation, and the ideas that he had to get players in for Jim was the best in the league, in my opinion. But again, I was biased. I was only in it as a young man in Philadelphia. And then Jim Curtin being from Philadelphia, I just think, and he's still there. He is that organization, in my opinion. And it's been fantastic to see him develop into that organization, because it is in my opinion, it's his. So that's sort of where it all just came to play. That's where it came to start. But yeah, that's sort of it.
I think a lot of people forget to mention the names off the pitch. You just gave 4 or 5 names that everyone listening would now know, and there's another 4 or 5 that you could list that are a part of the organization now or have moved on and so on.
I'll give you 2 more that I love to bits. BJ Callahan, interim national team coach for a little bit there, now Nashville, and Pat Noonan, head coach of Cincinnati. Unbelievable guys, and unbelievable football people. So there's 2 more for you.
So you mentioned
I got very lucky.
Yeah, no, of course.
I'm not at their level.
But you mentioned sort of the recruitment side and the patience when it comes to players and developing them. Did they have that on the staff side as well? Because obviously having those types of names and having the patience is key, I think, in a lot of ways. You're seeing teams now. I think the average term for a head coach in the top 5 leagues is like 8 or 9 months now. Like, you're barely getting a full season. So do you think they have that on the staff side as well, where they have the development? Like, what are the keys to development with staff?
I think, in fairness to them, and their owner, one of their owners, Richie Graham, he had said it a few times while I was there for 5 years. Now, I can't speak of the last 5 years, because obviously I don't know half of the staff there now, especially in the academy and into the Philadelphia Union too. But he had always mentioned that they always want to promote from within and give the time of the coaches, because there was a lot of good, as I explain it, and again, in my opinion, there's a lot of good development coaches in America. Do they get enough time to coach? I don't think so. but that's just the way the world is. Like, I'll give you an extra part of it. In USL, I don't think staff should be moved out so quickly. I know what they have to spend. I know the what travel does to you. I know the schedule. And now learning this role is just, people need that time, and they need to understand that they have that support and they have the time available to them, even if it is the length of their contract.
Mhm.
That should be enough time to get something going. And that's just my opinion on it. The owners would just probably argue through the door here that, no, this is not how we work. But I'm hoping we have it that way here. So
I want to get into some of the grittier questions here. You started the season 0-5. Obviously, being the middleman is sometimes harder than being either the head coach or the owner. You sort of have to balance people's styles of play, balance how they're reacting to the situation. Can you talk me through kind of those first 5 games and what it was like around the club and how you were able to turn things around?
Well, hey, we wanted these roles, and we had to go work in the roles pretty quickly. The conversations I was having were very entertaining from all parties. So,
I think an all or nothing sort of TV show would have been great around that.
Yeah, well, it would have been. If you guys had cameras in here, it would be hilarious. Not really, but it would have been good for the neutral. So, terrible start, and we were all sort of surprised because we had a good preseason. We thought we had a decent core. We thought we had and I still believe we had a good variety of attacking options. So, as an organisation, since Brendan arrived, we've always created chances consistently on the field. Always. Bar maybe 1 or 2 games this season and last season. Every season, sorry. We've sort of always created chances. Our issue was putting the ball in there. So, obviously, Hadji Berry had that fantastic year. But it was since then, it's sort of like, all right, we need to figure it out. And we had enough variety where we were figuring it out, but then 0-5 happened. So to jump ahead to Indy, which we tied 1-1 in a snowstorm here. In fairness, watching them all week, and I didn't do it a lot, but I went into film. I sat with them in a few meetings during the week. Didn't say anything, and what they decided to do and what they changed was a simple defensive piece in terms of how we're moving, and then we went 9 unbeaten. That's how simple it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was obviously roll your socks up. We're in the trenches here. We've got to figure this out, and you guys have to execute what we're doing on the training field every Saturday night now. But it was literally that simple in terms of what they showed, then what they tried to execute in the training field, and then obviously you took your chances. So you scored goals. Like the Oakland away win after the Indy, I thought we were fantastic. I think, in fairness, we've only won 3 games away this season, but I think Oakland, Hartford, and last night in Tulsa are 3 of our best performances of the season, even though we've been pretty good at home. So they have that simplified. They simplified that down, and the lads just executed it. The lads just, all right, this is what we need to do defensively, like in a low block, when we're pressing like we normally do, and then obviously when we're in that mid block. So. And honestly, it was fantastic to watch because they didn't panic. They didn't panic in front of anyone else. They didn't panic in front of me. They didn't panic in front of the ownership group. They just answered the questions that were in front of them. And obviously, I tried to take a bit of weight off. And they just went out and did it. And now hopefully, we're pushing for a home playoff game. I know, with a lot of season to go, people start talking like, oh, we're close. We're not close. Everyone has 8 or 10 games to go. But they're doing a hell of a job getting them pretty close to that 4th or 3rd or potentially 2nd spot if SAC continue to slip up.
The way you answered that question there, you sort of mentioned the idea that you trusted them and you had patience in that time, which came exactly from what you just answered before, from sort of the Philly system that you had learned, where you'd been able to trust them. So would you say sort of those 2 key words were key to the way you approach that situation?
Yeah, it's not rocket. For me, it's not really rocket science. These are our guys. I'll go back for them every week. The soccer conversation they have is 24/7. They know what they're talking about. My only thing and I remember teaching this to Alan years ago in Reading when we were about to give it to him because I was going a little bit more scouting for Philadelphia, definitely with Bethlehem Steel all the time. I was basically always saying that make sure your message, your tone of your message when you're on the field is perfect. Don't confuse anyone, you know. And I was told that as well from my uppers, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I always remember sometimes when you're thinking about, as a player, I was like, wouldn't train today. If you're a passionate coach, you're into coaching, you're going to think about your session every single minute after it. And I remember talking to Alan about it, and I was like, make sure your message and your tone is clear, because I know you can coach and I know you love the game. And same thing to Chamber. Make sure it's clear. And if it's not clear, make sure they understand soon after what you're actually after, what you actually want. And I leave them alone. That's the only thing I say to them. I bug them now on recruit, because sometimes they're that busy, and you know, with most USL staffs, it's there's not enough scouts. So we are the scouting team. So sometimes they're probably annoyed at me because I'm like throwing names at them, and they need to do a little bit more of that. But they're fantastic at it when they do it. So.
One thing I struggle with personally is dealing with conflict and dealing with like difficult conversations with people. And I think in your role, you can almost call yourself an expert where you're constantly dealing with those situations. We mentioned the 0-5, but even the day-to-day with players, with staff, with the ownership, with management, you have all these different pieces to the puzzle. And everyone has something that they either need fixed or changed, and you have to work together as a group to solve those problems. I'm curious how you deal with conflict. How do you deal with those difficult conversations?
Yeah, it's depending on who the conversation's with, obviously. Depending how private it has to be, confidential it has to be. You know, if it's me and the president, it's obviously, and we're annoyed at each other, let's say, it's between us. Hands down, it's between us. If it's between me, Chambo, and Alan, the whole organisation can hear the argument. If we really wanted to get after it, you know, if we really wanted to go, right, let's go. But most of the time, I think you just said it there. We all sort of get together. You know, I don't mind sitting in a room and having an awkward conversation. I don't mind that at all. It doesn't bother me. But my mind, the minute it starts, and it's probably a little weakness because I try and find a solution immediately. You know, and help that player or help that staff member or help that personnel that, you know, need the answer, or can I get the answer? And if I can't get the answer, I'll try and find it for them. So that's normal. But normally I would rely on, and honestly, I would rely on James and Alan with the three of us in the room, or even if it's something else in related to the organisation. My director of ops, she's fantastic, Lindsay. So sometimes me and her can figure it out, you know. So sort of those are the ways I go about it. You know, there's certain conversations that the staff, I think in every organisation, should never know. And then there's a majority of the ones that they can actually go, right, they can help out with it. You know, Alan will have an opinion for sure. Chamber will have an opinion for sure. And then you take all the bits and pieces. It's basically similar to me giving my opinion on the lineup, me giving them my opinion on the result over the weekend, and or a recruit. You know, you take a little piece. I don't want that one. How you don't think that one's right, and I do the same thing when I'm in conversations to conflict. So that's probably the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It gives me a good standpoint, at least something for me to write down in my notes.
It's new, though. It's new because you're right. You said that at the very beginning of that question. You were like, people are coming in now. Now, last year's head coach, I was general manager and head coach last year, but everyone was coming in more on football. Like it was all soccer, it was all football. Now it's a lot of different things as well as that. It's like there's an idea here. There's a player in that country. There's a player in this league. Switchbacks who need this. You know, front office need media day. I have the Insiders Lounge popping up on the calendar. That, you know what I mean? So that's different.
Yeah, definitely. I want to get into the word success. I think it can be defined many different ways in many different organizations. Yeah. For you guys, we can specifically talk this year, but I think the general plan and moving forward, what does success look like for the Switchbacks, and what does it look like for you personally?
For me personally, it's growth. It's growth of everyone in the building. It's growth of the organization on the soccer side. That's what the sporting director role is. So again, all the way from recruiting to putting 11 players in the field to win games. Success comes with time. Success comes with, I've used the word with building Switchback too, you have to be obsessed with it. Jambo and Alan and that Callie, our goalkeeping coach, Matt Bessemer, sports performance, Lindsay, our director of what, they need to be obsessed with getting their weekly idea, weekly sessions, weekly meetings 100% accurate as best they can. That's a successful week, which would lead into hopefully a massive effort that will ultimately give us more wins on the field. That to me is success. But for me personally, again, it's in this role it has to be growth. Like, what can I add into the first team staff next year that's going to help with all that detail that they need to do? And then how can I help with the front office to then completely understand how we can actually build the organization on our side and help out with them when they need it. So I think that's the definition for me. Long-winded, I know, but that's success for me.
And then you mentioned the word obsession there. How do you rejuvenate obsession, or how do you foster obsession in a club environment?
Yeah, great question. How do you foster obsession?
I'm really getting to the back of your head here. I'm making you pull
no,
the right
I don't
answers.
mind it because it is, the guys use the word a lot. We put it in part of our profile with a Switchbacks 2 player, so it's a big part of it. In terms of fostering it, winning helps. The players that I would go back to, the players that have been here the longest now, the 4 years that we've been here, they've seen growth every year. That helps foster it. They've seen small little details, and I've said little by little from day one, really, and helping the players that are going to build this organization, even when they, if possible, depending on where we're all at, but even when they retire. So, like, that helps foster it. And then the understanding of what we have here. Like, remember, I've gone recruiting now once or twice, and the understanding that, like, we might not be one person's top choice, but because of what we have here, can foster another obsession from that individual to come here. So I think those are two main things. And then it has to be in the person.
That's what I was going to say.
It has to be in the person. Like, those guys love being on the field. Like, they are obsessed with the X's and O's, obsessed with the film, obsessed with beating Tampa. That's what they're thinking about. Tulsa was over 12 hours ago, and they're like, how do we beat Tampa? What are we doing next weekend? I talked, Jimbo called me an hour after final whistle. He was talking about what we did in post-game and then how we're going to try and work one or two things for Tampa. It's unbelievable. I have to be obsessed with building the organization on the technical side, which I believe I am. Every once in a while you like to take a break. So the off season is sometimes nice, especially when you get to October time. You're like, oh, I want to go on a push. We want to win the whole thing. We were like, oh, where are you going on vacation as well? We don't talk about that a lot, but it starts to pop in. Doing it now many years, you start thinking about it. But the idea of obsession is the last game of the season, which is the 38th game of the year. That's what they talk about. And I think you just don't know what USL. You see what Phoenix did last year. We comfortably beat them here the last regular season, the game. And then they went on a 4-game run that they won the whole thing. And even Juan Guerra, a friend of mine, will tell you, we just hit at the right time. That is an obsession as you get into the playoffs. Can you start to produce mentally to go physically? It doesn't matter. You're going to actually dominate. So that was a great question, Chad. I don't know if I did it justice, but that's my best effort.
No, you did. I wrote down on my notes here that obsession's linked with growth, and I think that's what you nailed down there. That idea that as you grow, you keep that obsession. And then in terms of the sort of team chemistry building, when you're building a roster, I think the more they can look around and say, my teammate's just as obsessed as I am, then you constantly foster that growth. And then that growth leads to more obsession. And it's kind of a full loop. And then I think when they're looking at management, staff, the owners, everyone around them, if they see that same obsession and that same want to succeed, I think it's just a sort of everlasting loop of success.
Yeah, it's a funny, even when Brendan was here, sometimes the owners or partners of the organization were afraid to come into us when we lost. And that sort of continued on, like the competitive nature of all four of us, especially the three coaches in that foursome would be, Brendan, Alan and James. It's ridiculous. So sometimes people just leave them alone. It's just, you're not meant to lose, So that's obsession too. So
I want to get into the transfer market, scouting, and recruitment. You hinted at it a few times how that's an interest of yours, and your time obviously traveling to Cameroon sort of sparked that. I'd love to hear sort of your ideas on it, how you approach it, and then how it works in the USL and for the Switchbacks as well.
I think now talking to some other presidents, sport and directors, I think I would say it's quite similar for everyone, what I'm about to say. But obviously in the world of sports, data is a massive indicator on numbers, on obviously on the players' metrics or whatever else. So there has to be an interest of, in our way right now, there has to be definite interest of two of the three of us. So me and James have to agree. Alan and James have to agree. So that has to happen first. Then we send the player to our data analyst, or two of them that we have, and they break some things down for us in terms of that. And as that's going on, we obviously, everyone has the Y Scout, everyone has the online platforms, let's say, and then they actually, and we all three of us sort of get to our connections that might know the player. That happens all over the world. And ask about the player. Ask about the player, what you think of him on the field, what do you think of him off the field. And that's now the most important things for us going forward. And as that's about wrapping up, I call the agent. Break them down in terms of good, bad, the ugly. You know, agents can be actually, fair enough. Like, in fairness, the last few weeks, the agents have been quite honest about the negative stuff on some of their players, which is quite refreshing, because agents and people are understanding that a lot of sporting directors, a lot of soccer organizations, I can only speak for soccer, are looking for the person first because the player is probably already good enough. It's just, does the player then fit our profile? That's that final step. So then my next process, which is started this year, is I jump on a plane, and meet the rep, or depending on the length of the contract, if he's out in 6 months, obviously go meet the rep and possibly the player. Obviously you don't break any rules, but that's the plan, that's the idea. And then after that, the last part of it is an actual offer. So I love that process. It gives me excitement. As I said to the lads, they're all over coaching, they're all over the field, they're all over the X and O's. That scouting process and then getting something signed at the end, that's my itch, So it's sort of from start to finish. It's a process. It can be long, and sometimes it could be 3-4 days. Sometimes it could be 6 months. So yeah, that's how we do it.
It sort of leads to my next question. I was going to ask, how do you stay ahead, or how do you lead the game in terms of recruitment versus the many other organizations that you're competing against? So we can say that in terms of recruitment and sort of the transfer market and analyzing players, but also I think just across the board, if you can give me a general idea of that.
Yeah, I would say if someone says that you're ahead of the game, they're lying to you. Because we've lost many players over the years, even in Bethlehem, even now, that we've lost them by a few weeks. I lost a player to Louisville last year by a day, 2 days, something like that. You're not ahead. I don't think that people are ahead of the game. I just think the timing and the process. So this is why our jobs are important, is that everyone would argue, like, right, we've signed 1 or 2 players already for next season, and I've got phone calls and text messages like, oh, you've done that super early. But that's my process. I'd like to have at least 1 to 2 players signed by the summer for 2025. So from January, we finished pre-season, so March, let's say the first weekend of March is season. I'm now on that next train, that next window, in terms of, James is in my office annoying me because he doesn't like 1 or 2 things on what we have, which happens all over the world. So you start to do a process of scouting, you start to break it down, and then you give it the 12-month mark. And that's where I think this position is invaluable, because I can solely focus on that as well as trying to build the organization on our side. You're picking up the phone, you're talking to people about next season already. I had 1 or 2 preseason calls from current agents of current players, and they want to know what they're doing next year. That's just natural. So that's the process. And then between now, when June 1, when the free agency list comes out, through the end of the season, that's my new process now, learning it now. I'll jump on planes from June through November, or June through Christmas. which will lead you into that 16 to 18 outfield core. We're not Man City. We're definitely not Chelsea. We don't have the cash. So we have to plan that our main part of our roster is 16 to 18 outfield players, and you got to get it right, So
does that in-person scouting and in-person human connection, when you're able to meet either with the agent or with the player themselves, is that a drastic change to just having phone calls and conversations either
100%.
online or over the phone?
Yeah, we didn't sign someone a few months ago because of it. Just didn't get it. I didn't get it. He probably didn't get me. Like the rep, which is nothing wrong with that. That's just a subjective opinion. That's just an idea. I think, but I also did it a few weeks ago and I signed the player. That's just the way it is. I think it's invaluable. And I go in with a list of questions, and sometimes I don't go in with a list of questions, and I just sit here and talk. And he talks back, and then like you really do know. And a big thing for us is like, how ambitious they are in terms of their locker room. Where they are at the locker room. Because if you're going to meet this person, again, and I'll argue this till the cows come home, they're probably good enough to play in that stadium.
Yep.
They're probably good enough. You'll get one or two wrong. Everyone does. But if you're going to meet the guy, well, then that's the last step. It's proof is in the pudding. I won't name names, but I signed one, I didn't sign the other. So I think it's I think every club should do it. Now, I'm not telling every club to do it because I'm going to do it, but people should be doing more of it. I think that will help USL grow, really grow.
Yeah, I think I could talk on this topic all day, but we'll start to move along here. I want to know for Stephen himself, what is your most valuable asset? It can be a skill set, mindset, something that you believe is unique, maybe unique, but even just something that you work hard and you feel that it excels you forward.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this is a good question for everyone else, but like, I'd like to think that I'm pretty open in this position. I think that's a key asset in terms of us being a sporting director. There's some horror stories that we could talk about for an hour where some guys have ruined club. One person has ruined organizations because the decisions they've made, and they don't let anyone else involved in those decisions. And that happens. It does happen. So I'd say that would be a key one. My growth and patience is the second one. I can't say how invaluable that is. And then the third one, for anyone, I got this question asked in the media about 2 or 3 months ago, is shut up and listen. When you're developing and you're learning, just shut up and listen. And you won't remember everything, you won't take everything, but you'll learn a few things that will go, that's pretty good, So those 3 things, I'd say, I'd like to think that I'm as accurate as I can be with. Obviously, you're going to make mistakes. Everyone does. We're all human. But I'd say, if you ask that question to Alan and James, I might say 3 different things completely. Hey, whatever.
When we get to the end of your career, whether it's a coaching and management career, just the end, and we zoom ahead quite a few years, what sort of legacy do you want to be known for? What sort of legacy do you want to leave behind?
Yeah, great question. I'd love to know that I built, if I was here, let's say in 30 years, this organization is running completely smoothly from a U12 all the way to the first team. And you've built a training facility, you've traded players to MLS or Europe, It's similar to what Louisville are starting to do. And some other organizations are starting to do, or Charleston just sold Markinich over to Spain. That's obviously, we did it with Hadji a few years ago. So like that top tier development, moving players, top tier development and moving staff, because if we get the staff right, they're also going to have opportunities, and which is fantastic. It's nothing but, for me, it's nothing but a positive for the organization and what we're building here. So those whole things, like if I had a foundation and we had a competitive first team every year, while I'm sitting on a beach having a pina colada, that would be nice to know.
We'll wrap things up here with some quick fire questions. The first one, what is one vital part of your daily routine?
Vital part?
Vital
Coffee.
Part, the number one
Coffee.
thing. Coffee. All right. I don't think we've actually got that one yet.
Oh, necessary.
Do you have a favorite quote or saying, something that you can live by?
Yeah, I do. Me and my father always used to say, simple things done quick. So that was more for when I was on the field because you got to really think quick, and I was a midfielder. Simple things done quick, and I try and take it in, even though I can't do things as quickly. You have to have patience. Obviously, you keep saying that patience with growth, but how simple, like conversations with the staff, give me the simple part of it, and let's go get a solution.
What's something that allows you to rejuvenate yourself? I know the industry as a whole can be quite tiring. It can be quite a
Oh yeah,
lot at sometimes. What's something to just rest your head and get sort of away from the game, even if it's just for a few brief moments?
my 2-year-old son. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and when myself and Erica have, when she gets home, she's obviously got, like, she works too. Like that hour and a half, 2 hours before we bath time and then bedtime is just, the phone goes away. It doesn't matter. It's great. Or we're going on a bike ride with him. Yeah, my 2-year-old son.
If your life took a different path and football or soccer wasn't the path that you ended up taking, where do you think you'd be today?
No idea. Bartender. No
Bartender.
idea.
All right. As long as you can get free beer, you'll take it.
You'll have a free beer chat if we're sitting at the bar together.
And the last one here, if you could sit down with one person, dead or alive, who would it be and why? Sit down and have a meal with them.
Zinedine Zidane. Oh, yeah, do I need to say anymore? What a genius. Favorite player by far. It's sort of, and it'd be a moment of, like, I don't get starstruck, but it'd be a moment of, like, wow, that, in terms of that. And then any family member, anytime I'm in Dublin, like, or sitting down having a beer with my brothers and sister or whatever, or going out for a meal with them, like, you know, life is too short, so enjoy your family.
I'll give you one last one here. If you're sitting down in a pub in Dublin with Zinedine Zidane, what's the one question you ask him if you have the chance?
One question I'd ask him: how did you do everything? How did you do that? Um, what drove him? Like, what pushed him to that limit where people were just, like, in awe of him, or just standing back? Like, what pushed him? And I know it was his work ethic and his training. And I remember my father seeing him in Dublin when he played for France, and he said he looked like he was the most, like, small detail, but he was sweating the most of the 22 players. And at that point he's an established genius in our minds, But he was working his tail off, and how, and it was probably, he'd probably answer, like, because I wanted to be the best, or he should answer, I was or am the best.
Yeah. Stephen, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate you coming in on the day off. If you have any last words, and then we'll wrap things up.
No, I think, honestly, I love the podcast. I love what you do. I thought Alan's was unbelievable. I thought Brian Crookham's was unbelievable. I've missed the last one. I need to check that one out. The recap was very good. I like the recap a lot. I think it's a fantastic podcast, and I just kudos to you to do all this. I think it's a fantastic journey that you've been on yourself.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks again for coming on, and I look forward to speaking again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, buddy. See ya.